The time has finally come to wrap up the first comic in 75 years to star the original Green Lantern and focus on his solo adventures, while simultaneously exploring the fallout of some major life-changing retcons. So let's see what's in store for the future of Alan Scott's past. Alan Scott, The Green Lantern #6 is written by Tim Sheridan with art by Kian Tormey, inks by Jordi Tarragona, colors by Matt Hermes, and letters by Lucas Gattoni. The title of this issue is All That May Become a Man. And speaking of the title, I love the fact that it's designed as an homage to All American Comics, where Alan Scott first appeared. The Justice Society is battling the Crimson Host in the streets of New York, and the two teams seem pretty evenly matched, except for Dr. Fate and the Spectre, who each get a pretty cool moment to shine. And it makes sense that they'd have an easier time than everyone else, since they're two incredibly powerful magic users, and the enemy's powers are supernatural. Alan wants to join the fight, but he's limited by his own inexperience. Remember, Alan has never made a construct before, and didn't even know it was possible until seeing Vladimir do it, and that was only, maybe 20 minutes ago? Still though, Alan is willing to give it his best shot. But before he can figure it out, Alan is attacked by the leader of the Crimson Host. Vlad jumps in to defend Alan, but his red ring is out of power and his battery was destroyed. So there was nothing Vladimir could do but take a vicious beating that ended with his death. Alan sees Vladimir's body laying lifeless among the smoldering embers of the Crimson Flame, and he unleashes everything he has through his ring, sending all of the willpower he can muster directly towards the Crimson Host. But the energy stops before it reaches them, as if unable to touch them, which the Crimson Host takes as a sign of the inferiority of American superheroes. They're so distracted by their own monologue about their evil plans for world domination that they don't even notice what's actually going on. Alan wasn't trying to shoot them, he was trapping them. The Green Lantern just made his very first construct. An energy bubble, just like the one that Vladimir used to save his life. The JSA is ready to take the Crimson Host into custody, but then something both miraculous and horrifying happens. The battlefield is covered with remnants of the Crimson Flame, burning away at the debris. The Red Lantern ring absorbs these remnants and brings Vladimir back to life. Again! And in his rage, he unleashes everything he has at the Crimson Host, incinerating them. Vladimir says he thinks the Crimson Flame wanted them dead, since they took its power without being chosen. Maybe that's true, or maybe it's just an excuse for his own vengeful outburst. Either way, the result is the same. The Crimson Host are gone, and the Red Lantern is under arrest. Seeing Vlad cross this line was devastating for Alan because it solidified what he had been afraid of all along, that the man he loved really wasn't here anymore. Years later, Alan would look back on this battle fondly, as the moment where he and the love of his life finally reunited as partners and allies. Alan Scott and Vladimir Sokov, the Green Lantern and the Red Lantern, fighting side by side. To Alan, their connection felt stronger than ever before, like two sides of the same cosmic miracle. Until Vladimir killed the Crimson Host, proving once and for all that he and Alan each fight for completely different, incompatible reasons. Once everything settles down, Alan decides to thank Derby for all his help. He starts using Derby's cab service in costume in broad daylight as a sort of celebrity endorsement to ensure that Derby gets more business. And on top of that, Alan gives Derby his classic hat, his literal Derby, to replace the hat that he lost when he brought Alan's battery up to the roof. Alan goes to visit Vlad in his cell and offers him forgiveness. Make no mistake, Alan isn't about to condone or ignore the fact that Vladimir killed people. But Alan is content to let the criminal justice system deal with that aspect, while he sorts out his own feelings for Vladimir and everything that's attached to him. When Alan looks at Vladimir chained up in a cell, he sees a reflection of himself. He sees a man exploited by his government, used as a tool, as a weapon, without any regard for him as a person. And in the case of Russia, that weapon backfired. So fun fact about World War II, in 1941, Germany violated a non-aggression pact and invaded Russia. And according to this story, the reason they did that was because the news coverage of the battle in New York exposed the existence of the Red Lantern and the Crimson Host to the world, leading to the Nazis wanting to find the secrets of the Crimson Flame. And apparently there are plenty more secrets left to find, because after Alan leaves, we see that Vladimir no longer needs a ring to manifest the powers of the Crimson Flame. The same thing happens to Alan decades later during the period when he called himself Sentinel instead of Green Lantern. This should mean that Vladimir can leave prison whenever he wants, so hopefully we'll get to see the story of whatever it is he does next. But speaking of government exploitation, Alan actually went to see Vlad at the request of J. Edgar Hoover, who you'll remember is threatening to expose all of Alan's secrets unless the Green Lantern takes orders like a good little soldier. And now, after everything that's happened, Alan has had enough. Hoover threatens to expose Alan to the world, and Alan just says, fine, do it! All of this, all of Alan's fears, have been about what might happen if everyone found out who he is, what he is, who he loves. But if that choice was made for him, if someone like J. Edgar Hoover pushed him out into the light for all the world to see, the way Alan sees it, he wouldn't have anything to be afraid of anymore. In fact, he'd be emboldened to use the power and popularity of New York's favorite hero, the Green Lantern, to very publicly expose the inhuman ways that institutions, including the United States government, treat their own citizens for the crime of being in love. The Green Lantern would become a symbol for everyone who feels like they have to hide in the shadows, living half their lives in secret so that they won't be cast out, or worse. In time, he'd inspire them to rise up as one and live openly in the light. And he'd also be sure to expose Hoover's secret proclivities just for good measure. At this point, both the Flash and the Spectre arrive, standing at Alan's side in endorsement of his words. The Justice Society is no longer going to be at the beck and call of the government, and Hoover can go ahead and lose their phone number. They'll gladly fight for the safety of their country and its people, but they're not soldiers, they're not agents, and they're going to do this their own way. The final scene of this issue, of this entire miniseries, takes us back to the present day. All this time, Alan Scott has been telling this story to a shadowy figure who turned out to be his son Todd, the superhero Obsidian. I don't know why they kept it a secret until now that Alan was talking to Todd, since it was the most obvious choice, but whatever. Part of the reason for Todd being there at the end is to ask the big question that everyone always arrives at when they find out that the Golden Age Green Lantern is gay now. If Alan Scott had all of these experiences in the late 1930s and early 1940s, why did he wait until the 2020s to come out? Questions like this are an attempt to reconcile a modern retcon with decades of established continuity, though it's also very easy for some people to use questions like this as a way to delegitimize the retcon, saying that it doesn't make sense and it ruined a good thing. And realistically, I don't know how much value there is to even asking this question, because of course there's no answer that's going to satisfy everyone. There are decades of stories that show Alan Scott being straight, and now the retcon says no he wasn't. And either you can roll with it or you can't. Personally, considering some of the batshit insane retcons that have come to define all of DC Comics throughout the years, I don't see why this one should be that hard to accept. But, for better or worse, this story does try to explain the retcon. Alan tells his son that, after everything he'd been through, he questioned the validity of his own feelings. Did he actually love Vladimir, or was he just influenced by the connection between the Emerald Flame and the Crimson Flame? I can't really blame Alan for being unsure of himself. He saw the person he loved die, only to later come back from the dead and reveal that he was actually a Russian spy the entire time. Then the Emerald Flame started talking to him as a voice in his head, and don't forget his torturous experience in the asylum. So I can understand why Alan might feel like he was standing on shaky ground when it came time to start openly living a lifestyle that was still taboo, to say the least. But this story very smartly recognizes that Alan was lying to himself. That on some level he knew he was making excuses. And he knew it for one simple reason. He fell in love with Johnny Ladd long before either of them ever got anywhere near those magic flames. Is that kind of avoidance particularly heroic? Is it becoming of someone who we hold up as a paragon of righteous willpower? No, not really. But it is very human, and that's what Alan Scott is, first and foremost. Feelings aren't a rigidly structured system. It's not as simple as putting yourself in a category and then strictly adhering to the rules and expectations of that category. A lot of people do that, maybe even most people, but that's more of an adherence to a social construct than it is some absolute fact about how love and sexuality work. The fact is that Alan loved Johnny, and he loved Rose, and he loved Molly, and he loved more men and women in between them that we'll probably never know about. Because love is a great big fantastic mess that does not fit neatly into a single category, no matter how badly you may want it to. Alan Scott is a gay man who had relationships with women, even had kids with one of them, and that does not change anything about the fact that he's gay. That might seem brain-breakingly illogical to some people, but what can I say? There's nothing logical about emotions. We feel what we feel, we go where those feelings take us, we love who we love, labels be damned. There's an epilogue that's nice, though it feels a little tacked on. In a prior issue, Vladimir pointed out that Alan phases through solid walls by accessing the fourth dimension, which is a reference back to Alan's origin story in All-American Comics number 16. The fourth dimension is literally time, so when Alan phases through a wall, he's actually moving through space during a time when the wall doesn't exist. He is literally time traveling every time he phases through something, which is wild to think about. But Alan didn't really care. He had no interest in learning how to properly travel through time, until the day he found out about his children. It's a long story, but his wife ran off before Alan even knew she was pregnant, and then 15 years later, his son and daughter show up at JSA headquarters. That's when Alan dedicated himself to mastering time travel, because he couldn't bear having missed seeing them grow up. He had to be sneaky about it, to avoid changing history, but he did manage to see some of Todd and Jenny Lynn's childhood, and while it's not the ideal experience, it's still one he wouldn't trade for the world. But then he did one more thing. He traveled back in time to 1941 and wrote himself a very vague letter, telling his past self that one day he'll have children and he'll get to see them grow up. He didn't include any specifics because he knows he would have risked all of time and space if it meant finding his kids sooner. The purpose of this letter was to give himself hope. Between World War II and his own emotional turmoil, even the Green Lantern needs a guiding light to lead him out of the darkness. Again, it's really sweet, I just don't know if it fits too well in this specific story. The story ends at a new beginning. The Green Lantern stands tall alongside his teammates on the Justice Society, and Alan Scott has taken important yet difficult steps towards living a better, happier life. Man, I'm gonna miss this book. It wasn't perfect, nothing is, but it hit a very high bar of quality early on and then continued to deliver that same level of quality all the way to the end. I think this has been the most consistently good Green Lantern comic we've had since Far Sector ended in 2021, and I don't say that lightly. I really only have two complaints about this miniseries overall. One is that it was so focused on achieving its main objective that there really wasn't any room left to flesh out Alan's character in a more general way. I would love to know what Alan's favorite book is, or if there's a radio program that he's a big fan of and never misses a broadcast. Maybe there's a little place to eat a few blocks from his apartment that he goes to several times a week and always orders the same thing. Little humanizing touches like that can make a character feel more like a person, and it's a shame that there wasn't an opportunity to explore more aspects of Alan's life. And that leads directly into my other complaint about this miniseries. I wish there was more of it! I hate that this is just a miniseries. I would gladly continue to read new stories about Alan Scott set in the Golden Age by this creative team. We know for a fact that there's more story to tell and more blanks to fill in. I just hope we're lucky enough to see this creative team reunite and be the ones to take us on that journey. So that's it for this miniseries. Now I want to hear what you have to say. What did you think about this issue? Do you feel any differently about the retcon now than you did before? Should DC keep doing more of these miniseries set in the Golden Age? Tell me all about it in the comment section down below, and subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm nowhere near close to being done covering the adventures of Alan Scott, or the legacy of the Golden Age Red Lantern. But until then, thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan, we'll talk again soon.